Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to show how I work. And this is going to be, so let me first introduce myself. My name is Dotan Saguy. I'm a documentary and street photographer based in Los Angeles, California. And I have just started, I'm actually working right now on developing, with COVID and everything, I can't go shooting the way I normally do, so I have more time, and I decided to spend that time doing something I've been wanting to do for a while, which is to put a lot of what I teach in my in-person classes and workshops with Leica that I teach into a online class, an online master class on street photography. So that's something that I'm about to launch, and I wanted to just tell everyone today before I start. I've been working on, for the past couple of years, there's a couple projects that have come out that you might have, one of them you might have seen as a book come out 2 years ago, and that was my Venice Beach book, and about the life of the boardwalk on Venice Beach, which is changing a lot. Even before COVID, it was changing quite a bit, and I kind of captured about 3 years between 2015 and 2017 that were pivotal and where a lot of changes were happening. So this is a book that has been out. I think it's still available. It's still in print, so you can find it out there. And the second book, which you won't find yet because it hasn't been released, is Nowhere to Go But Everywhere, which is about a family of vehicle dwellers. So this one is more in the documentary realm. And whereas the first one was more street/documentary, this is more documentary. And the images that we're going to look at today are actually taken from those two books. So you'll get to see the original raw files and how they were processed into the images that went into the book using Nik Silver Efex Pro 2. So that's, I guess, my little introduction. Again, this is the masterclass I was talking about. And and the masterclass will cover things like all the street photography things, from approaching and photographing strangers. That's going to be a whole module on that. Finding and capturing epic moments. So finding those moments in the street and actually being able to capture them successfully. Editing and picking your best shots to submit them to contests or for exhibits and whatnot. So those are all topics that will be treated at length in that masterclass. So without further ado, one more kind of housekeeping thing I wanted to get through because I'm sure that's going to get a lot of questions. The pictures that I'm going to show you, the original raw files, you'll see it's a little bit odd because 3 of them will be black and white raw files, which I don't know if some of you may never have seen black and white raw files. And 2 of them are going to be color raw files, which is much more something that all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Now, the reason why there's 3 black and white raw files and 2 color raw files is that I shot the Venice book project with the Leica monochrome, which has a black and white only sensor. It's a long story, but they removed the Bayer array, which is the thing that sees color in the sensor, and so the raw files come out of that camera black and white. And the camera does not see color, and I'm not going to go through the details, but there's lots of advantages for black and white in doing that. I currently actually am, so the book was shot with the older versions of the monochrome, and I just got back to the latest version, the M10 monochrome that just came out. So that's what I now shoot with. But the other project I'm going to show, the Nowhere to Go But Everywhere project, was shot with the M10, Leica M10, which is a color sensor. And so in that case, I've had to convert the images from color to black and white. So, and they both basically look like what you're seeing on the screen right now. So that's it for my introduction. Laurie, if that's okay with you, we'll just jump right in and look at the original raw files.
Yep, sounds good.
So we're going to look at these 5 raw files. I'm going to go through them just real quick so you can take a look at them. They look really bad. And there's a good reason they look really bad. So first off, the Leica monochrome that I shot, the 3 that you see in black and white here, I'm going to go slowly through them here so you can all have the time to kind of get a sense of what they look like. I'm not sure that we're going to actually do all of them. We'll see how much time we have, but the reason they look so bad, and I'll start processing the first one as I talk about this, is because with the black and white raw file, you have to make sure you don't lose the highlights, because if you overexpose, the highlights are gone and then you can't recover any details from it. So I purposely underexpose when I shoot the monochrome. No, that's why the images look so dark. But when we see the histogram, so I'll go into Lightroom and go into develop mode, and you'll see that the histogram is actually, looks like it's preserved everything. And I can make sure of that. So this is a tip that I would recommend starting with even before going into Nik, is there's a handy shadow clipping and highlight clipping little button here. It's kind of hidden in Lightroom. And when you hit that, it will highlight anything that's lost in the highlights or the shadows. So in this case, nothing was lost, but if I move the exposure around, you'll see that here I'm losing the sky, or there I'm losing part of the wetsuits, and I'm coming back to 0 here. And as you see, the histogram is all contained and there's no clipping. So even though it looks underexposed, it actually isn't in terms of retaining all the detail of the file. So that's good. So in this case, I don't have anything to adjust before going into Nik, so I'm just gonna jump right in, go edit in, and then edit in Silver Efex Pro 2. And I'll just go edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments and hit edit. So I didn't change anything. So here we go. So this is Nik. If you first download it, this is how it will look, except I guess it won't have any favorites here. But you'll have all the presets, and all your adjustments here will be closed except for the global adjustments that will be open. So all those toolbars or toolboxes will be closed. I like to really open all this up so we can see what we have, because we can always scroll through them. So I'm going to open that up right now. When you open them up, next time you jump into Nik, Nik will remember that you want them open, so they'll come back open by default. So every time we're going to open a new image now, it will be open, entirely open like this. So what I like to do in terms of processing the images, you'll see it's much faster if you start from a preset, and there's some presets that work really well for me personally. You know, for you it might be a completely different thing, because what I'm going to show you is really how I process it in my style and the style that I look for. And so you'll see if we just go through quickly, so this is neutral, so nothing has been done to the image. And if I go quickly through all these presets, you'll see that, you know, some are just not good. The image just doesn't improve by choosing them. So, you know, you don't have to worry about those. What I want to encourage people to do is to find some that really work well for their images. So you can see here immediately it looks better. So, and as you can see, there's a little star next to the name. That one is orange because I've already picked it as a favorite. So if I wanted to add this one as a favorite, I'd just click that star and it would show up in my favorites. So we'll just jump into my favorites, because these are the ones that I start my processing often with, so I've saved them here. By the way, I wanted to clarify one thing. A lot of people use editing for processing and sort of interchangeably. In professional photojournalism and so on, processing means what we're doing right now, which is to make the, you know, dodge and burn and do all the things to the image to make it look good. Editing is a completely different thing. Editing means only picking your best images. So when you get home and you look at what you got in your card and everything, you're editing to try to find the best images. and then those images then get processed. So I just want to make that distinction, not, avoid using editing as processing. Editing is just picking the right images. So all we're doing today is process. So we're processing. I like to start with one of those. So let's see which one looks best. So I'm going to go over. Oh, I like this one. Yeah, this is not good. So it looks like it's between full contrast and structure and full dynamic. In this case, full contrast and structure might be a little over the top, but I think it's a good starting point, so I'm going to pick this one. So once I picked it, I can just kind of move this away and have more space to work. I don't know if you saw what I did here. This is just that little door looking thing here with the arrow, and I just push that, and then I got more space to work. And one thing I'd like to look at here is, by the way, I have my monitor, I don't know if you can see, no, you probably can't see. I have it on like not all the way bright, but like towards maybe 80% brightness. And that's important because otherwise it just gives you a false sense of how, what your contrast is and so on. So one thing I like to do is to look at the histogram, which I hadn't opened yet. And I think by default it might be in loop mode, which gives you the detail. But the histogram is much more useful, so this is what I work with. And for those who are familiar with the zone system, Ansel Adams and invented it, and you can see in basically all the levels of gray, from completely black to completely white, and it kind of gives you that little, I don't know if it's visible on the webinar, but there's little dots that kind of color, red dots that color the image based on what zone I'm in. And it's good to have, I'm going for very high contrast images. That's kind of the style I'm going for. So I really want to be able to see dots in the zone 10, which is all white, and in zone 0, which it seems like I have everything in zone 0, but zone 10 is not quite there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the brightness, and I'm going to bring up the highlights. So if you look at the histogram at the bottom, you can see how the histogram is moving, that little chart here, as I'm moving that highlight slider. So it's nudging a little bit to the right here, and eventually we should see some dots appear. Let me see. I think we got, I don't know if we got any, we're closer to have them appear anyway. There might be some somewhere. It's just a little bit hard to visualize. So that's the first thing I do. Oh, the other thing, I forgot to remove this. A lot of those presets have this tonality protection for the shadows and the highlights. I like to just remove that because I want to work with the other. I feel like this is a little bit cheating, and it doesn't let you go all the way to where you want, because it's something that's there to kind of avoid for people to hurt themselves by moving those sliders too far. But I prefer to remove them so I really see what I'm working with. And so if I go back to my highlights, now if I press this, I think, yeah, see now they've appeared. So now that I don't have that highlight protection, my zone 10 has actually appeared here. There's a few dots here in the sky. So now I know that I'm all the way to the whites, and I've got also all the way to the blacks. So my image is really as much contrast as I could give it, which is what I want. Now, by default, those presets have things adjusted. So you can see that Amplify White and Amplify Blacks in the preset that I chose is already at 100% for me. And soft contrast is at -21. So the soft contrast slider, I think, is the most dangerous slider of Silver Efex. And that's the one that I think people really hurt themselves with most. When I see over-processed images on Instagram, it's often because of of that slider. And so it's a beautiful tool, but you really have to be careful with it. You can go too far, so I'll show you. If I went to minus 100%, it looks really kind of fake and bizarre. And this is a photo that's actually where it actually doesn't destroy it too much, but in some other instances, it can create all kinds of artifacts, and you really don't want to mess with that too much and go too much in the negative. And on the other hand, it can also hurt you, but usually people abuse it in the minus, and so you have to be careful. So here it gave me, I think by default, something like 20 plus. I think I might dial it back to maybe 18 or something. That's enough to kind of give the effect that I want. And so I think that contrast is fine. Now the structure is to give you additional detail, and what's great is it's separated by the highlights, midtones, and shadows. And here you can see that it's really the default in this preset is that the midtones are really pushed hard, but everything else is pretty, it stays at 0. So I like those midtones. You know, it's with Nik, the beauty is you can play with it and see where it takes you instantly. So I think the midtones might have been slightly too much. I'm going to pull it to maybe 35 instead of like 40 something. And I do want a little bit more detail in my sky, which is where my highlights mostly are. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that. And then I also want more like the wetsuits in the shadows. You know, I'd love to see more of the drops and, you know, all that kind of the wet look detail in there, the reflections. So I'm going to push the shadows a little bit. Don't want to go too far, but give it a little bit more shadows. The fine structure, frankly, I don't use very much. I can't see that much difference. I think it makes a difference if you have like portraits that are very close up and there's lots of like hair detail and very like small fine detail. I think that then for like portrait photographers it's very useful, but in the work I do, I don't really mess with the fine structure very much. Okay, so basically now we've done, I think, what we could in terms of the global adjustments. And you saw we got very quick, you know, it was very quick because most of it was already done for us from the preset. And so, oh, by the way, see the color filters here. Because we've got a black and white raw files, these will do nothing because there's nothing to filter. So those are irrelevant for this particular case. And so what I like to do from there is to, if there's anything I want to do locally, I can use control points. So this picture actually doesn't require a lot of that, but we're still going to do a little bit. So you see how the presets we have already gave us more detail in the sky. This was a kind of a gray, stormy day, so I kind of want to emphasize that a little bit more. So I can take the control point, put it in the sky right here, and either, you know, and I'll play with it. Like I'll see, okay, what does contrast do? No, that's not really what I want. I think I'm going to underexpose just to bring up the clouds a little bit more. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger of an area. So this is to make it bigger, smaller. And I can amplify the blacks maybe a little bit. This is too much. So you see, as I do this, you'll see that there's some dust. We'll look at them with the zoom. There's some dust here, some dust spots from my sensor that we can clean later in Lightroom, but you see how they can appear. They appear much more in contrast. You can really see them after I do those kinds of modifications. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, she's not sharp. The first surfer in this whole lineup, the focus was really set on the middle one because I wanted a little bit more depth of field. And I mean, there were reasons why I was shooting at the aperture I was shooting at, which is, I don't remember, it might be 5.6 or something. So she's not sharp, and I was moving and they were moving. And so I just want to point out, and this is something that I also teach in my master classes, I think we tend to give too much attention to technical perfection, and I think in a lot of ways we shoot ourselves in the foot by doing that. And if we look at the masters and the most iconic photos of all time, there's little imperfections that I think are what make them what they are. So this is one thing. You know, she's her face is not completely sharp, but she's in movement, and you know, it's perfectly. You know, I've got this printed large in exhibits and everything, and no one's shocked by it. So I know some people will look, you know, at those details. So that's why I'm getting that out of the way here.
Dotan, can I ask you a couple questions specifically about this image, which people are making lots of comments about right now?
Okay.
Number one, somebody asked if you ever posed your subjects. Were these surfers posed for you?
Yeah, so I do, you know, so the work I do is really photojournalism applied to street photography and documentary. So all the photos that I take, I never pose or stage anything. This is like rule number one. So, and this is a category question, really. It's like, it depends how you label your work. If you label your work, you know, photojournalism and street photography, I guess street photography is a little more flexible of a term, but if it's photojournalistic standards, which my work is, then nothing must be posed, staged, or photoshopped. Like, I couldn't add anything to this photo in Photoshop, or I couldn't remove, like, let's say there was a can of Coca-Cola in the sand there, I could not remove it. That would be against the rules of photojournalism. You have to represent exactly the reality that was there. Of course, you can, you know, make things darker and lighter, and all the stuff we're doing is okay from a photojournalistic standpoint. But otherwise, really, I would call it fine art. If you're doing what's called fine art, then it's totally up to you. You can Photoshop things. You can mix two photos together. You can, you know, ask people to pose, and so on and so forth. But the images that we're going to see today, and all my work, really, if you look at, maybe, you know, there's a couple of exceptions where I posed portraits, but in that case, I specified that these are posed portraits. Everything else is completely unstaged, unposed.
Great. One last question on this one. Excuse me, the horizon line is tilted. Was that purposely done to keep it tilted?
You know, this is the photo. When I first saw this photo, I was like, oh wow, you know, I love the alignment, and the composition, you know, turned out great. And then I realized, oh wait, the horizon is tilted. And then I try to untilt it. Like, so I went in Lightroom and I just, you know, fixed it. And I was like, wow, it doesn't look nearly as strong. Like, something changed in the composition when you align the horizon. And so I was like, okay, this is how the photo wants to be. And, you know, some photographers have used the tilted horizon a lot. Like, I'm thinking like Gary Winogrand was notorious for that. But this was not on purpose. I was just moving, and, you know, I was just basically backing up. You can see the camera position is low, so I was low while backing up. It was very uncomfortable position to be in. They were walking quite fast back from the beach, and so it just turned out that way. I wasn't making an effort to make it tilted. It just worked out really well, and it doesn't want to be fixed. So that's it's really interesting. Some photos you fix them and you realize, oh my God, I've lost the magic of the shot. So this is one of those. Going back to control points, you know, here it doesn't, you know, necessarily need it. I could definitely go without it, but like, let's say I wanted to have the middle person face here a little bit brighter. What I would do is I would use the zoom tool. I would put my control point right here. I would make sure it's not too big because I just want the face brightened, not everything else. And I usually, for brightening or darkening, I usually use brightness, but I find that often Amplify Whites works better with skin and kind of leaves everything else alone, which you can see, like, the hair is not getting brighter, just the face. And I go easy on it. And once I found sort of the sweet spot, I can say, all right, maybe I can apply the same setting to the person in the back. So that's where the Option key, I'm on a Mac, hold the Option key, and I take this control point, I can move it, it copy basically over here. So here it doesn't actually make, you know, sometimes it works differently in different cases. So here it doesn't have as much effect. So I can add a little bit of brightness if I want. You can see how also grabs the surfboard. So you have to be careful about how much of a circle. You can play with it and see what you get. You don't want it to be unnaturally brighter than the rest. So I think this is about right. So that's about all I want to do to them. I think the one thing that I often look at, I like to look at the corners, the borders of my image. And one thing that people, basically the eye naturally goes to the brightest part of the image. Right now, the brightest part of the image looks like it's in about the kind of left area right here. Or at least that's one of the brightest parts. What bothers me is it's on the edge of the image, and you don't want the eye of the person to go away from your subjects. So what's nice in this image is the eye sort of goes around and around between all the characters. I don't want the eye to escape on the side. So I'm gonna take a control point and really darken that area a little bit more. Just a little bit, so it's not white, entirely white, it's a little bit of gray. The other thing we can do, and this is in the finishing adjustments here, there's a vignetting control, and I like the lens fall off 1. Lens fall off 2 tends to be too much, but lens fall off 1 just gives me that little extra darkening of the corners. It doesn't work for all images. Here it works better, and that in combination with the control point that I dropped, really now retains the eye within the image and focuses on the characters. So I think this is all I want to do to this picture. Oh, one thing I wanted to point out, not something I use, but something, or not something I've used for those projects, but something you might want to check out, especially if you're a film shooter, or if you wanted to shoot film. There's a lot of film types that have been added here, and you can add them. So it's not something you want to start with, but once you've done what you wanted to the image, you can go in there and just try different film looks. So like if you wanted like a T-Max 400, really grainy sort of, dark look, you can go between them and see what it does. The Ilford Pan 400, but you can kind of finish it with a film look if you wanted to. Lots of options to choose from, so this is kind of fun to just try them and see what they do. We're just going to end up, so I'm going to go back to neutral because I haven't used those for my own processing, and just going to save the image and go back to Lightroom. Before and the after. So that was pretty easy. When we got to really most of, at the end we spent a lot of time nitpicking on a few things, but we really got most of the way there in the first few seconds, which is the power of Nik Silver Efex and why I love working with it. So that's the first image. Got a couple of others. Let's go with this one. So this is those like hippie musicians that were on the beach, on the boardwalk one day. So before we jump in, let's look at the histogram. And here I see that it's not quite, it's really underexposed. It might need a little bit, there's nothing clipped, it looks like, but it's really dark. You can see a lot of it is in the dark area of the image, and the bright area is not quite all the way to the end. Like I could push the exposure up and get more out of this image. So I'm going to do that before I go into Nik. See, I'm going to slide my exposure and see how the histogram now is like filling out the unused space, and things are coming off the blacks here also. So maybe I'll just keep it to +1. Okay, so now that I've kind of balanced the histogram, I'm gonna take that image into Nik. This should go a little faster because I'm not gonna explain everything about the presets. We're just jumping straight into the favorites here and just pre-visualizing. See how much better it looks just instantly. So here I kind of prefer that full dynamic to the full contrast just looks like too much to me here. So I'm going to start with the full dynamic harsh and close my presets library because I found my starting point. So first, I'm going into my global adjustments and checking out my histogram. And my zone 0, because we've pushed the image up a little bit in Lightroom, I've lost, there's nothing I can see in the zone 0. And the zone 10, despite us pushing it in Lightroom, I can't see anything in zone 0 either. So it looks like we need to expand the histogram a little bit more. So I'm going to start with the highlights. So if I click this, I didn't explain that last time. If I click the zone, it's really hard to see when it's clicked and not clicked. So you kind of click it, and then if it's clicked, then when you move sliders, then you can see those dots appear. I'm going to click it again to see. Oh, see, I forgot to remove my tonality protections. I'm going to remove those tonality protections. And I'm going to go back here, pick this. Okay, now we see the dots appearing. So now I've moved my highlights to 100%. I got a few dots appear over the shoulder here and over the head, but there's really not much else. So it's doing a good job at maximizing. Maybe I'll go down slightly to like 90% because I started getting dots right there. And then same for the shadows. I'm gonna bring down the shadows until we start seeing some dots appear. So we got the yellow dots here. Okay, this is about right. So now we've really expanded the histogram. So we've maximized our contrast. I can unclick these things so the dots stop showing up. And I can move into my everything else I want to do. So I want to definitely push the blacks because I want that sky to look just like the previous picture. It's a little bit more of a winter sky. And I want some of that drama back in. I also want, I think I want more whites. So I would just kind of play with it. Also the soft contrast, there might be too much of it. I'm going to dial it back a little. It's that one that's the dangerous one. So you can see like you can do really bad things with it if you're not careful. So I would just, it's a great tool, very powerful, just use it with restraint. And the structure, it looks like in this case, the preset doesn't have any of the structure sliders preset to anything. So I do want more details in my mids. I do want more details in my highlights, and I do want more details in the shadows. I think this is probably about right. See self contrast. Yeah, I think this is about right. So you can see now that so now that we've done that, I think I'm pretty happy with how the image looks, and we can move on to the local adjustments. So there's a few things that bother me, like for example, the dollar bill, because of everything we've done so far, has really turned to white. There's no detail in it anymore at all. So I can go and fix things like that with my local adjustments. So I'm gonna put a control point on the dollar bill, make it really, really small, and then bring back either with brightness or with Amplify White. See, this Amplify White is much more, I don't know, it's more subtle in what it does than the brightness. I can help it with more brightness. But okay, now we've got our dollar detail back. I don't love the backpacks, even though they're important information. You know, these are traveling hippies, and it's something that you want to know about them in the photo, but I just don't love how they detract from their faces and what they're doing. So I'm going to darken them a little bit. I don't want everything. So, oops, sorry. Yeah, I was looking for the size. So I'm gonna, it might take a couple of sliders because a couple of control points. So I'm doing this here and I'm moving that control point to another part of the bag and maybe another part of the bag. See, it also makes the dollar bill pop now that the backpack is taking back a little bit. Same thing, there's another backpack on the side, and that one's on the side of the image, so it's what I was explaining earlier. Anything on the side that's bright is not something you want, because especially if it's not something you want people to look at too much. You want to bring that puppy back a little bit. Okay, so they're still there. You can see all the details in the backpacks. They're just not overwhelming the image anymore. Now the faces really is what I should start with. His face is too dark. I really want more detail in his face. So I'm gonna use my Amplify White slider, control point. Bring it back. There we go. That face is also a little too dark. But somehow his outfit is a little too bright, so I'm gonna put another slider here. So I'm working a little fast, but you see what I'm doing at this point. This is all repeating the same type of strategy on different parts of the image. I'm moving that same slider. See, so here, his face was already pretty well lit, so when I move that slider, it's like way too much. So I'm gonna bring that back to something that I find pleasing, and her face could also maybe be slightly brighter. There we go. This is another image where I think it could use a little bit of that vignetting, lens fall off. So I'm gonna do that. Yeah, I think we're pretty much there. I mean, there's things like, it was raining that day, so the ground is wet here. I could enhance that, if I wanted to spend more time, I could drop some control points and increase, I'll just do one here, increase the structure a little bit so you can really see, and maybe, take down the brightness, increase the structure, maybe the contrast. I mean, you can play with it and see what effects it has. Really should zoom in. I love the little toes coming out here. So you can drag, you can Option or Alt, copy those control points until you get that kind of reflective, style that you want on the ground. So I think that's good. I think this image pretty much looks like what the final version, maybe the sign, brighten the sign a little bit so it's more readable. There we go. So I'm pretty happy with that one. I'm going to save it at this point. And there we go. That's the after, before. I'm just going full screen so you can see. Big difference. So yeah, maybe next we'll go to the color files just to make sure we have time. How are we doing on time, Lori?
That would be great. A lot of people are asking if you could show a color image to black and white.
Yeah,
so that'd be perfect.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. So we'll show a tricky one. So this is a really tricky image, and it's one that is really key. It's like one of the more popular images in my new book, Nowhere to Go But Everywhere, about this family of vehicle dweller. So this is a family who lives in a school bus with 3 kids, ages 2, 5, and 10. So the 10-year-old is up on the roof here. The 2-year-old is playing with the mom. And it's actually the 5-year-old is in the back. We can't quite see her because she's in that dark spot over there. But this is a really tricky lighting situation where, you know, he's the kid on the top is outside, obviously, and he's lit by daylight. And then the inside of the bus is quite dark. So there's all, I mean, we're really pushing the limits of that sensor here. And you can see that, you know, there's some overexposed areas, the ones that are highlighted in red here because of the histogram marker that we put here, and some that are like falling in the shadows. So what I'm gonna do before we go into Nik this time, I'm going to need to work a little bit more on recovering a little bit of this. So I'm going to bring the highlights down. So getting rid of the, so by doing that, you can see the red disappears. That means I've recovered, because this is a color image and it has more, there's more detail to be had in the different channels, color channels, I was able to recover that. Had this been on a monochrome image, a black and white raw file, I wouldn't have been able to do that, because what's lost in the highlights of a raw file, of a black and white raw file, is lost. Here, somehow, with 20% minus on the highlights, it got them back. The shadows, I can bring that back too and get rid of the blue, or most of it anyway. So I think this is how I want to send that image to Nik. So now I'm going to go edit in Silver Efex. And here we go. So now it's automatically converted into black and white because this is Nik Silver Efex, and it will give me the same presets. So in this case, you know, we could go back and see if there's other presets that are good for this, but I'll stick to my favorites for right now. And I think I already see one that works better than the others. That wet rocks one works really well, it seems like. It's just, you know, the dark areas are still really dark, but we can fix that. So I think I'm going to start with wet rocks in this case, or maybe full dynamic. That's also pretty good. But I think this is more natural, and it really highlights the main subject, which is the little boy on the top. Looks a little bit like a little girl because he had long hair, but this is a little boy. And he, yeah, I like how he looks in there. So I'm going to start with wet rocks, and I'm going to close my presets so I get more space. And I'm going to remove my tonality protection. Wow, this is going to make this, in this case, it goes really dark when I do that. But I think we can still work with it. So, I mean, worst case, you can always go back to another preset and start over. It's this is what I love. But you know, it's half the fun is just experimenting with the different settings. So here, the histogram, there's lots of things in the zone 0, too much. And then I even have things in the whites. So zone 10 has some dots on the boy's face and shoulder and the sky. So we got plenty of, so I actually might take the brightness. Oh, no, I can't take it down. It's a really tricky image because of the contrast situation. So the highlights, maybe bring them back down. The shadows, maybe bring them up a little bit. And dynamic brightness. See how dynamic brightness is a really cool tool because it doesn't overexpose too much, but it brings everything much more evenly up. So my dark areas now are manageable. The bright areas, I'm still going to have to work on figuring out how to bring that down a little bit. Maybe bring the highlights down further. See, I got my highlight. See, this is a completely different situation. My highlights are now minus 100%. It's my shadows that are pushed up as opposed to pushed down. So the image had too much contrast to start with, so now I'm trying to just manage the situation. Oh, the contrast is also pushed really hard in this preset. So I can bring the contrast, the actual contrast back a little bit. Okay, now I can look at my Amplify Blacks. I don't want to amplify the whites too much because it's bringing too much of the inside of the bus into the picture. I like the bus staying in the dark. I just want to light up. I think we're going to use those control points to brighten up the faces of the people inside the bus, but I don't want the rest of the bus to be too bright. In terms of the structure, I like that the midtones are pushed hard. The problem is a lot of the inside of the bus is in the midtones, so a lot of the reflections gain a lot of detail, and I think in this particular image, it's distracting from the characters. So I'll show you how to use control points to offset that locally. So like the inside of my bus, I can remove structure, because this is basically what those global structure adjustments do. But if I take now a local adjustment on that reflective roof of the bus, the ceiling, I can take the structure down and you can see how the detail gets smoothed out. I don't want to smooth too much out, but I want to take a little bit down. And I don't mind also bringing the brightness down a little bit. And I can copy this to other areas. Like this area, for example, in the middle, there's a lot of reflection in there that I think is just distracting. And this is it's a really personal, aesthetic, personal choice that you should make with your own images and for your own style that you're looking for. So I'm just explaining how I feel as I'm looking at this image. So I really like how the boy is the exposure and the detail on him. Again, the control points I think can help remove some distractions. Like those branches are almost the same level of gray as his face and his body. So I think I'm going to take those down a little bit, just so he pops more. This is one where I'm going to have to copy this over a few times along the branch. And I'm going to, so because the branches are very close to his face, I think part of the darkening that I did to the branch kind of spilled over to his face. So what I'd like to do is put a kind of a neutral control point on him so he goes back to normal. See, I didn't change anything to this control point. It's just that this control point now offsets the neighboring control points that are darkening things. So just to retain the look that he had before that I liked, I'm just putting a neutral control point or a couple of neutral control points on him. Maybe one on the sky here. There we go. Now he really pops, and the background is really kind of fading. So that's a good thing. Part of the hatch here is really bright. So it's still bright now, but it's not quite as bright. So those things make a difference. More detail also as it darkens. And that way the boy is really stays the star of the show. So, again, it's it's important that that people's eye go to the bright areas of the image. So whatever's bright in your image that you don't think is necessarily, should be highlighted, you need to bring down. Okay, now the faces, so we clearly have a problem with the faces in the bottom, at the bottom of the picture now. Partly because we've got those darkening points and the faces have taken some of that, and partly because we've taken the preset that we did that was darkening that bottom part of the image. So I'm gonna just one by one, just real fast, go and brighten them a little bit. Might go into zoom mode to just see better what I'm doing here. There's a nice moment here. We don't want to brighten it too much because we don't want it to look unnaturally bright, because they're obviously in a dark area, but you do want to show a little bit more detail. Maybe in the hair slightly. Oops, that's too much. And Izzy, the husband. So I actually photographed this family over a period of almost a year as they were parked in Venice, California, and became good friends with them. So now they're actually back in Delaware with some family. And anyway, long story, but the book has a lot of that story of the 10 months that I spent with them and different aspects of their life and everything. So, oh, I didn't say that book is coming out in September. Here, it will be out in Europe actually as early as June. And if you want, you can pre-order it on my website. This is a book that will actually be in, it's actually a pretty small print run. Oh, there's one thing in this image that I forgot to mention that probably, I don't know if anybody's even noticed because it's so hard to see, but in the back of the bus is the 5-year-old. I think I mentioned it earlier. You can barely see her, but we can bring her back with control points. So you see how dark she is. If I put a control point, I might even go to 200% to really see her. Here we go. But I really just want her face lit up a little more. Maybe add a little contrast. I mean, this is this is not a scientific thing. I don't know if you can see. I'm really trying different things and moving sliders back and forth and just looking at the effect that I get. But I can already see her better. She has a flower in her hair and she's playing with some kind of toy. And so if I go back to, by the way, all I did was to press that zoom to 100% once and I go back to my normal image. And if I press it again, I go back to 200%. So this is a pretty handy, quick thing. So, but now she's back. I mean, now she's hard to see because she's got 3 control points on her, but she's in there. And so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to do to this image. I mean, there's many different other nitpicky thing we could be doing, and very local things, but I think we've done most of it. So I think I'm pretty happy with it at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. So we didn't pick the easiest image to work with here. This is a challenging case. We started from this and we ended up here. I'll put it in full screen. So, I mean, what's important is you do want to know, you want to work with purpose. You want to know what you want to get out of that image, what you're trying to highlight, what you're trying to bring down. And with that strategy in mind, just use the powerful tools that Nik gives you to achieve that. Okay, so just taking the temperature here, there's 2 images we haven't worked with yet. I don't know how much time we have and which one of the 2 we should start with first, or if there's any other questions we should answer first.
There are some questions, but I'll ask that at the very end. Maybe you could take one more color image because there's so many people asking about that.
Sure, absolutely.
An example, that would be great.
Yeah, so this is the same the same little boy that we saw earlier on the roof of the bus. This is the actual bus, and he is not happy at that moment. Okay, let me just go first here. Yeah, yeah, he's not happy at that moment because they're taking the bus away because the bus is actually broken down. So they tried to fix it for a while and they couldn't. And so anyway, they're taking it to the repair shop, and basically he sees his home going away and he's just not a happy camper. So in this particular image, the histogram looks pretty clean. I don't think we're clipping anything. This is a very easy to expose image because it was a kind of a white sky, and the light was very even, and so I think we can just go straight into Nik. See, it's confusing because even now I realize Lightroom gives you this thing that says preparing the file for editing, and it's not editing, it's processing. So someone at Adobe should get the memo. Okay, so now we got, again, we're in our favorites, and we see it. This one actually looks good and different. It's like it depends what you want. So what I'm going to want for this image, again, it's all about what you want. So you have to kind of decide what you want. I want to show how gritty the sidewalk is. I want to show how gritty the bus is. I want to see that dark sky in the back. And so I think the preset that gives me more of that feeling, this is too clean. This is, his face is weird. The one that I like most is the full contrast and structure. So I'm going to start with that one. Again, closing my preset library, regaining all that screen real estate. And so there's not a ton to do to this image. I do want the bus is really bright. And again, I think it's detracting too much. I want the boy to be the star of this image. So I'm going to darken the bus. And by doing that, I'm also going to expose more of the grit and the dirt on the bus, which is part of what I want here. So let's see how I can do that first. Let's just check on our histogram first. So it's funny because the image looks quite bright, yet we don't really have anything in zone 10. So it's really handy to have that as a check. There's not even anything in zone 9. So the sky starts in zone 8. So that image, it's funny because to the eye, it doesn't seem that way, but it could be a lot more contrasty. So I'm going to hit the 10 here and start pushing my highlights. But before I do that, I'm going to undo the protect highlights and shadows. So I'm going to push my highlights until I start seeing, I'm at 100% now. And okay, I do see some dots in the sky. So now and maybe some on the bus as well. So maybe take it back a little bit to 80. That sounds right. So now I got my 10 back and I still got my 0. So I think, see how this is, it looked like it had a lot of contrast when we started with the preset, but now it looks like it's like a couple of steps above in terms of contrast. So it really is helpful to have this tool because it's hard for the eye to pick up the level of contrast that you get when you just look at it in the vacuum. So that preset has Amplify Whites and Blacks all the way to 100%, which is fine. Soft contrast is high too, it's around 30. I don't know if I need it this high. I guess it's fine at 30. I'll leave it at 30. I do want more structure in my highlights because the bus is in my highlights and the sidewalk is in the highlights and the sky is in the highlights. So I do want to bring out the grit and the detail and the pavement, structure and the bus, all the grime on the bus. And I do want maybe a little more shadows for like the tires and things like that. So I pushed the structure a little bit in those areas. It also gives me more structure in that wood. So I think we're doing pretty well as far as our global adjustments. Now we can go into control points and fine tune things a little bit. I definitely want to bring the bust down in terms of contrast, in terms of how bright it is. So I'm going to start by figuring out how to do that. So if I do the Amplify White thing, maybe let me also a little bit of brightness. This might be too much. Okay, this is starting to work here. I don't really want to get the post in this though, so I'm going to try to preserve the brightness of the post. And it will detach the bust from the post a little bit too, because they were kind of one block before, and that way they're going to be two different things by the time we're done. I just want to target the bust. So see how much of a difference that makes to the bust. Oh, by the way, you can use these things to compare. So that compare button, we didn't use it before, but this is a good segue. You can go back to your original image, the raw file. Oh, this is the raw file converted to black and white. So this is your starting point, basically, and compare to what you've done. So this is really helpful. You can compare in other ways. So you can do a split preview where half the image is processed, the other half isn't. You can do a side-by-side. So, but I like to check with just with a compare button from time to time just to see how things have changed. And so I'm gonna just take this and just make sure the bust is kind of even. And I don't want the post to be too affected, so I'm gonna put, you remember how we were talking about a neutral control point? So I'm gonna drop a couple of neutral control points on the post to bring it back to its former glory here. And so I think that's good. I think the face of the boy might need a little bit of work, and there's a little bit of brightness in that sidewalk in the back and in the front that bother me because it takes the eye out of the drama of the boy crying. So I'm gonna maybe darken a little bit of that sidewalk here. Take that to the front as well. This might be too much or too big. And then, so actually now that I'm just dropping a control point, a neutral control point on his face, and it looks like his face was affected by all the darkening that we did to the bust. It's just that, you know, that he's close to it, and so he picked up some of that. So now that let's zoom in and see a little bit better, maybe not 200%, but like 100%. So he actually looks pretty good just by dropping that neutral control point. I don't know that I'd want to actually change much to that. So, and there's some, you know, if we're nitpicky, there's some kind of bright areas here that could use a little bit of just tempering them down a little bit helps just focus us a little bit better on the boy's face. Just that truck. See, it's really fast because once I've got a good setup in terms of bringing down the whites and the brightness, I can just copy that around and to whatever areas of the frame that I find are a little too bright, and without having to adjust anything, it just gives me a good sense of how things should be. See, here I just dropped another neutral control point around the boy, just so that the pavement around him is restored to what it should be and not influenced too much by the darker control points that we've dropped. Might want a darker one here, just, okay. We can make the bus more grimy by pushing the structure a little bit, just on the bus. Same for the, if you wanted more reflections in the windows, we could just maybe not darkening them too much, but maybe, so if I drop a neutral control point and I just increase the structure, then my reflections are a little more crisp. There's interesting details in those windows. And that family is kind of lost in the grime now. The family painted on the side of the bus, the little cartoon of the family. So, you know, I could decide to bring this back a little bit. Well, see, this is too much with a neutral control point, but if so let's see how I want to tackle that. Maybe with this control point, I could do a little bit less of the darkening and maybe a little more contrast. Now, sometimes where you drop the point really, like, see how if I move a point from here to here, there's a huge difference. So you have to kind of sense where you want that point to drop to get the effect that you want. Okay, we get a little more of the family now, not too much. So that's, I think that's pretty much where I want this picture to be. So I think that pretty much, yeah, that we can, I'm happy to save it now. So yeah, so now if I show you I'll show you one more thing in Lightroom. When you're back in Lightroom, there's something that's useful. Okay, so this is the before and after. This is our picture now. This is when we started. This is a completely different level of drama that we've added to it. It was a dramatic scene, but now this is a really dramatic scene. And one thing to try to check, you know, in Lightroom is you can always check your, you know, if your contrast, here are contrasts now that we're back. We're not, the highlights are all preserved, right? There's nothing that's showing up as red. We did lose some blacks, but it's in the tires and in areas that we really, it doesn't mind. It doesn't, it's okay to lose the blacks, to go completely black in some of those areas. In the whites, though, it looks like we could push the contrast slightly more now that we're back in Lightroom. So there's a little bit of a trick here to the whites and the black slider that are in this menu at the top of in the basic grouping. If you take that white slider and you hit that option key, so it might be Alt again on the PC, you can see, so when you hit so if you hold the option key and you start clicking on the white slider, it will basically make everything black except for any whites that you've lost. So see, we've lost a little tiny bits of white, and it shows you where in the image you lost them. And if you move the slider, it will start increasing, right? So you're losing more and more of the picture by moving the slider. I don't want to lose quite this much, but it's okay to lose a little bit just to make sure the image is really at its top contrast, which again is the look that I'm personally looking for. Maybe +5 would be fine. And then in the blacks, I'm already losing a little bit. If I'm okay losing a little more, I can play with that. In this case, I don't really want to, so I'm going to stay at 0. This is just a good way to check when you get back in Lightroom that you've got that maximum contrast, and you can push it slightly more using the whites and the blacks, holding the Option button or the Alt button. That's it.
Great. Okay, for those of you that can stick around, we're going to ask just a couple questions because we've gone over the hour. But yeah, Dotan, if you don't mind, just a couple questions, and then we'll wrap it up. There's a question from George asking, are there any type or style of color images which from experience will not make a good black and white image?
Any style of color image that won't make a good black and white image?
Yeah.
Well, so to me, I do shoot color, and I have a project on Cuba in color, and I sometimes shoot other things in color. Color, this is really a philosophical discussion more than it depends on you and what you're looking for. I like to use color, and I like to leave things in color when color adds important information to the image. So it goes back to the kind of the photojournalistic aspect of things for me is, in Cuba, for example, there was so much information in the color that once you remove the color, you lost a lot of the details that make Cuba Cuba. And it was really, I wasn't sure when I first went. I actually went with two cameras. I went with my monochrome and I went with the color camera, and I wasn't sure which I was going to use. And then from the beginning, I saw just too much information in what I was going to represent that I just didn't feel like the monochrome was appropriate there. So I shot everything in color. But I think it's really a personal choice at the end of the day.
Okay. A lot of people are asking if you can use the Nik Collection with other programs. So I just want to let everybody know Dotan's workflow is to go from Lightroom, but you can also access it from Photoshop and from even Affinity Photos, Photoshop Elements, and DxO Photo Lab. So you can access those plugins from there. One last question here. Paul was asking that you weren't using much of Lightroom, and he just wanted to verify that your typical workflow is really using a lot of silver effects to convert your color images or your black and white. Is this true?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few things. One thing we didn't do here because it's just too tedious and it just takes a long time is removing dust spots, for example. So I that's something I do in Lightroom. It's very easy to do in Lightroom. Correcting horizon lines, things like that, and it's great in Lightroom. I showed how I use the blacks and the whites to really push the contrast in Lightroom. I use the histogram to judge whether I need to under or overexpose slightly, move the exposure around before I go into Nik. But really most of the processing work I do is done in Nik Silver Efex, and for colors, images in color effects.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Dotan. Thank you again for the presentation, and we hope to see you in another webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.